I'm Ron Kneebone. This is the School of Public Policy. Homelessness is a big problem in Calgary. If we're going to solve the problem, we first have to understand what the problem is, and that requires gathering information. What we've been able to do in this study is to get information on 33,000 individuals who have used the emergency shelter system in Calgary over the past 5 years. And what we did is we looked at how they use shelters. And to my surprise, the great majority of shelter users use it once, maybe twice, over a 5-year period for a few days at a time, and then we never see them again. What I thought was the case is that most shelter users used it as a home. I thought they were what we call chronic users, people who go into the shelter and tend not to leave. To my surprise, they made up only 1.6% of the 33,000 people who use shelters in Calgary over the past 5 years. That to me was a big surprise. So what do you use this data for? Why do we do this? We do this so that we can understand what we need to do in order to help people move out of homelessness into permanent housing. So one of the things that we found, for example, is that the chronic users, although they're relatively small in number, they use up 1/3 of all shelter beds in Calgary. That's because they're there all the time. The transitional users, the people that we actually design emergency shelters for, we design these things so that people can go into a shelter for a couple of nights and then find other housing. Those are the 86%. They use the shelter only infrequently. And now you have to ask the question, how do we help the transitional users as opposed to the chronic users or the episodic users? What do these data tell us that government should be doing differently than they are now? The goal is to end homelessness. What the study shows is that a relatively small number of people, we estimate about 850 people in Calgary, are so-called chronic users of shelter beds. If we could find supportive housing, permanent supportive housing for those relatively small number of people, we could reduce the shelter use by 1/3. That's a large gain, and also it's potentially a money saver, because keeping people in shelters is very, very expensive. So is supportive housing, there's no doubt about that. But remember, you're spending more on supportive housing, which would provide a lot of good services to people in need, and we're spending less on shelters where they're not being helped as they should be. One of the things that we are able to do with these data is to look at the ethnicity of shelter users. So although in Calgary only 3% of the Calgary's population is Aboriginal, 20% of shelter users are Aboriginal. Also interesting is the age distribution. I was surprised and disturbed to find that 9% of shelter users are in fact children and young people, people less than 18 years of age. I was also shocked to find about 10% are seniors. So again, we need to look at these data so we can better understand the problem. The community itself is working hard in order to solve this problem. And so you'll find that the Calgary Homeless Foundation is working with home builders and a campaign called Resolve in order to raise funds to build affordable housing. But we can't stop there. The problem of homelessness in Calgary has to do with the lack of affordable housing. These efforts are important, but they're not all that we could be doing. We also need to engage the private sector and using their energy to build more affordable housing. How do we do that? This is where government steps in, and government has to think about changing zoning laws. That would be at the city level. They need to provide tax incentives. That would be at the federal and provincial level to encourage private builders to build more affordable housing. There's a lot that can be done, and the school has put out previous studies that show these sorts of things can have very important impacts on homelessness. What we need is to get going and doing them. For those who want to see more details and see the paper itself, it's available at the School of Public Policy's website at policyschool.ca. Click on Publications and you'll see the paper. I'm Ron Kneebone. This is the School of Public Policy. Thanks for watching.